الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today, inshallah, we will take a brief look at chapter number 52 of the Quran, Surah At-Tur. And this is one of the chapters in that section of the Quran known as Al-Mufassal, chapters which are short, which have short verses, and for which the themes are the fundamental values and basic teachings and principles of Islam. Surah At-Tur, like the other chapters in this section of the Quran, it talks about the basic beliefs of the Muslims, in particular the belief in the resurrection and the Day of Judgment. And there are a number of important reminders and images that we get in this chapter of the Quran. In the beginning, there is an oath, Wat-Tur, an oath by Mount Sinai, wa kitabim mastur, and a book that is written out, fi raqqin manshur, in a parchment that is unrolled, wal bayt al-ma'mur, and the house that is flourishing or thriving. There are a number of ahadith of Ahlul Bayt that tell us that this al-bayt al-ma'mur is a place in the fourth heaven, or according to some narrations, the seventh heaven. But it is a place, we can say, that is between that highest realm of God's creation, beyond the material world and beyond our imagination, and our material realm of senses and creation and decay that we experience and that we live in on the material level. Somewhere in between is this place known as the fourth heaven or the fourth sky, as-sama ar-rabi'a, and there is a whole house there which is called the flourishing or the thriving house. According to narrations, it is in a place that is parallel to and directly above the location of the Kaaba. And it is a place where angels, they go, and it is an honor for angels to come into that place for worship, just like it is an honor on this earth for human beings to be present in Mecca, at the Haram of Allah, to go and do tawaf of the Kaaba. That is a privilege. So similarly, this spiritual house is thriving and flourishing with angelic company. And according to narrations, every day there are 70,000 angels that go to Al-Bayt al-Ma'mur. They enter it to pray, and then they leave, and that is a once in a lifetime, once in their existence opportunity for the angels to worship. So we don't understand the reality of this heavenly house of worship, the reality of the angels' worship, but it is a reminder for us that beyond what our senses can perceive on this world, there is a vast creation. These days it's fashionable for people to think of the vastness of creation in terms of the expanse of the physical universe. So the solar system is vast beyond our conception. And then if you think that the solar system is just a drop in the ocean of our galaxy, and our galaxy is just a drop in the ocean or even less of the observable universe, then the vastness of physical creation becomes even more vivid for us. Some of you may have seen those descriptions where they say that, if our entire solar system, for example, were a grain of sand, then how many millions of miles across would the universe be? Or comparisons that are sometimes drawn. Or you may have seen those videos where they zoom out gradually until it gets beyond our ability to conceive. That is something that even a person who doesn't believe in God, we can imagine, we can conceive of. But the reality is that the vastness of the universe is not on the physical realm at all. Yes, the earth is very big. And then the solar system is far vaster than just a small planet. And the galaxy more than that, and the universe more than that. But the real vastness of God's creation is not on that physical level, it is on the spiritual level. And even if I don't know what Al-Baytul Ma'mur is, and I don't know what the fourth heaven is and what the seventh heaven is, and I don't know what it means to say that 70,000 angels are privileged every day to come and worship, and they receive that honor from Allah and then they're never able to come back. Presumably because there are that many new angels who are being created or are being allowed by Allah to come into that place of worship. None of that is something that I can wrap my mind around and I can fully comprehend. But just the knowledge of that vast spiritual level of creation, it gives me a sense of the depth of God's creation, its complexity, its intricacy, its profundity, its purpose. And we don't need to know how things are in order for us to get the benefit of that realization of the complexity and the wisdom of God's creation. There is a spiritual reality to this world that is far more important and far more profound than any physical laws that we can deduce or that we can perceive with our senses. And in order for us to understand the resurrection, the day of judgment, and the reward and punishment in the hereafter, we have to be able to move past just our senses to be able to comprehend the purpose of God's creation. So people who are skeptical, they're skeptical of the day of judgment because they say that, well, when a person dies, their body is lifeless. And then maybe they are buried and they get decomposed. These days there's many people who are cremated and they turn to ash and their ashes are scattered. And so from a purely physical perspective, you might say it's far-fetched. This is never going to come back. It's done. But if you realize that even that physical death and decomposition is according to very intricate and very beautiful laws that operate with consistency and with wisdom and with a logic. And the one who created the law that allows a body to develop from a single cell or a single embryo, and then to grow as a human being, and then to die and decompose back into its constituent molecules and elements, that same wisdom that created and caused to develop can recreate and then can reward or punish. So you move beyond the physical realm to see that there is a wisdom and a profundity that informs the physical realm. And that wisdom, that spiritual reality is deeper than the physical reality. Because it is the basis by which the physical world exists. It is the reason why we can have science, and we can observe and then deduce laws that govern the way the world works, because there are laws, and there is a system that has been put in place within creation. So perhaps the reminder in the Quran of these spiritual realities is for us to contemplate both the physical vastness of God's creation and the spiritual vastness of God's creation. And with that introduction, we can see both of those elements in this surah. وَالْبَيْتِ الْمَعْمُورِ, that thriving house of worship where angels go to worship in the heavens, وَالسَّقْفِ الْمَرْفُوعِ, and the raised roof, which is perhaps referring to the sky that we can perceive with our senses. The physical vastness of creation, the sky, at least visually, looks like a roof above our heads. And the spiritual station in which the angels worship, that is beyond our physical perception. So these reminders of physical creation and spiritual creation, they are for a purpose. And in this surah, Allah mentions both punishment and reward. But there is first mention of punishment and then mention of reward. And that is the wisdom and the beauty of the Quran. By mentioning punishment, it first it reminds you of the severity of the test that we have in this life. It kind of strikes a little bit of fear in your heart. Don't take things easy, don't become complacent. But then, the concluding message is one of mercy and one of reward, so you have reassurance and you have an ability to motivate yourself to move closer to Allah. So, the beginning with punishment, it shakes us out of our complacency. But then there is a fear that maybe we will lose hope. And the conclusion on a note of forgiveness and mercy, after we have been shaken, and hopefully we're no longer in inertia, then it motivates us that Allah is forgiving and He invites us to come closer to Him. It is a very beautiful way that the Quran engages with our psychology and our human nature to both strike fear in our heart, but on balance to strike hope. So let us look at those verses. The Quran says, "Inna عَذَابَ رَبِّكَ لَوَاقِعٌ." The punishment or the torment of your Lord, it is going to take place. مَا لَهُ مِن دَافِعٍ. Nothing can forestall or prevent that punishment. And then the Quran describes what will take place, that heaven and earth will move. وَتَسِيرُ الْجِبَالُ سَيْرًا. The mountains will move like they are waves on water. It may be a reference to plate tectonics, perhaps, or it may be referring to some other reality that we cannot comprehend today until it actually takes place, and then we will understand it. But it is, regardless of exactly how it will take place, it is a very powerful image that the very mountains that are like pegs, like anchors in the landscape, they will move like waves of water. A major cataclysmic event that will take place. Then the Quran says that this is the day, وَيْلٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Woe on that day to those who give lie to the teachings and the commandments of Allah. Why will they suffer this terrible fate? الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي خَوْضٍ يَلَعَبُونَ. People who take everything for sport. And this is something that the Quran is addressing, but it's very relevant to our society, because in our popular culture, it is very fashionable to be ironic or sarcastic about everything. So even take our normal language, when I want to describe something, no matter how serious it is, I'll compare it to a game. Politics is a game. War is a game. Life is a game. We use this language to kind of compare as if even the most serious subjects, they are going to be understood with a model, with an explanation that is derived from sport or from play, rather than making us think of things in a more serious manner, making us more contemplative and more pensive, our culture, it leads us towards taking things kind of lightly and with a grain of salt. Many of you know that many people, they get their news from social media, from comedy, and they deal with difficult situations, whether in their personal life or in society or in politics, through sarcasm and through comedy and through humor. So that is all fine, it has a place, sarcasm has a place, irony has a place, but it has a place if it is like salt in food. You have food, you are serious, you understand the seriousness and the gravity of social issues, political issues, of religious issues, and then sometimes you leaven the seriousness, you kind of balance the seriousness with a little bit of humor and sarcasm. The problem today is that we don't have serious discussions, everything is humorous. So this is perhaps what the Quran is hinting, a very modern problem, but one that is not new. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي خَوْضٍ يَلْعَبُونَ. A religious topic comes and it just becomes trivia and a game. Let's mock it, let's make a joke about it, and then not even address the seriousness of it. So humor, again, is good. Be lighthearted. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't get offended too easily. And don't take life too seriously. That's all good. But recognize that it is a very important decision you need to make about how to live your life. And then you are lighthearted because you have faith in Allah, and so you're not self-important. It's out of humility and not out of cavalierness and arrogance that you are lighthearted. But those who take things as a joke, it is as if they are arrogant and they just can't be bothered. Not because they have faith in Allah, so they're able to let go, but because they don't have faith in Allah, they don't think anything is meaningful or serious, everything is a joke. And we have to be very much on guard against that tendency, because in our society and in our culture, there is such an abuse of that tendency to use humor and sarcasm in order to discuss serious topics. So the Quran, it describes the punishment of those who are evildoers, and then it describes the reward, and the reward is for muttaqeen, the pious. Innal muttaqeen fi jannatin wa na'im. They will be in gardens, they will be in bounties in God's favor, and the Quran, it describes several of the attributes, and just in the interest of time, I'll mention one. For those who are believers, the Quran says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُمْ بِإِيمَانٍ أَلْحَقْنَا بِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَمَا أَلَتْنَاهُمْ مِنْ عَمَلِهِمْ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. Those people who are faithful and their children follow them in faith, then Allah says we will cause their children to join them, and we will not diminish them of their actions in any way. And that is a very beautiful promise in a hadith from Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It is said that this refers to sometimes where parents, they are very pious and their children are not quite at that level of piety. And it sometimes may pain the parents that, I spent all this life acquiring knowledge and my children are not interested in pursuing that path of scholarship or of devoting their entire life to the service of Islam or the masjid or their fellow communities. Sometimes we push our children a little bit too hard because we don't want them to miss out on that spiritual opportunity that we value so highly, or the reward that we hope for and aspire to. And this Quranic promise is a very meaningful reminder to us that it's not always possible for every generation to maintain that level of practice and sincerity that their parents may have had. You pray for Allah that your children meet and exceed your standards. That if I was able to attain a certain level of knowledge, I want my children to be more knowledgeable than me. If I was able to attain a certain level of sincerity or piety or service to Islam, I want my next generation, my own children, the children of my community, to far exceed that. But don't put that pressure on them, because then you might do the opposite and there might be a backlash. So this Quranic promise, it tells us that وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُمْ بِإِيمَانٍ. If your children are mu'min, then Allah will cause them to catch up to their parents. As the Imam said, one level of meaning is that they may not have had that same level of practice. But don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. In trying to push them to memorize the Quran, in trying to push them to be better, don't make them break from the faith and from the practices that are an obligation and a requirement. And trust that if you teach them what is Iman, you raise them as a believer, then even if their actions fall short, Allah will bring them up. According to hadith, to bring happiness to the parents, the children will be raised up beyond what they have attained with their own actions, but nothing will be diminished from the parents. So sometimes people ask that question, how can different people at different levels of paradise, how can they interact? Let's say that you are very pious, and I was not that pious. So I'm on a lower level of paradise, and you're at a higher level. Does that mean that we're never going to meet? Because that might make you sad if you really were my relative or my friend, that you won't be able to meet me. And ulama, they have given an example to explain that. Let's say that you and I both sit down to a meal. But I have a cold, and so my sinuses are stuffed, and I can't smell and I can't taste the meal as much as you. So you're eating the meal, it's a wonderful meal, and you're enjoying every flavor. And I'm eating the meal, but I'm not enjoying all of the flavor because I'm sick, so I can't appreciate it. It's not that we're separate. We're in the same place. But you're on the 7th level of heaven, and I am on the 1st level of heaven. And I don't even know what I'm missing, maybe, because I've never had that meal when I wasn't sick. So I'm not even jealous of you, but we are together, and yet we are not together. So that example helps us understand that it is possible for people to be at different levels of paradise, but yet still interact and be in the same place, yet not be in the same place at the same time. So it's a very beautiful message. There is another level of meaning which is also found in a hadith, that this refers to the dhurriya of the Prophet and Imam Ali alayhi as-salam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And it means not that the Imams are less than the Prophet and Imam Ali, but that Allah brought them to the same level, so they have the same knowledge and the same authority that the Prophet and Imam Ali had in order to be able to guide and provide instruction to the people who are obligated to follow them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Then the Quran, it discusses the Quraysh and some of their opposition to the Prophet, the skepticism that they had towards the Quran, and I will just mention one of the things that is mentioned, and inshallah we can look at the surah to gain the remaining messages. أَمْ يَقُولُونَ تَقَوَّلَ. Do they claim that this Quran has been forged and falsely attributed to God by the Prophet? And the Quran, it answers that by inviting us to contemplate and فَلْيَأْتُوا بِحَدِيثٍ مِثْلِهِ إِن كَانُوا صَادِقِينَ. All right, if you say the Quran is forged, then bring a hadith, meaning a speech like the Quran. And really what that is an invitation to contemplate the Quran. Because you can bring a scripture that you create, you make up on your own, that's in the Arabic language. But then what you will find if you ever try to embark on that journey is that either the eloquence will not be there, or if you're able to make it rhyme and have it very eloquent, then the content will suffer. Sometimes you go for the poetry, but then the meaning is not as clear, or the meaning is not as comprehensive. And so really this is not a challenge for anyone to try to bring something like the Quran, because that is impossible. We can think of it as a challenge to contemplate the Quran. If you are skeptical, then look at the Quran deeply, and you will see that it is a very unique book, not just in the sense that there are few books like it, but that there cannot be any other speech like it. It comes from a divine source. In its beauty, in its clarity, but more than that, in the comprehensiveness and the depth of the religious message that it gives. It inspires, it guides, it teaches, it corrects the extremes of our passions and our emotions, and it puts us in equilibrium and in balance with our own soul, with God's creation, and most importantly, with God. So the Quran, it has expressed this challenge in numerous places, and sometimes it is bring a surah, bring 10 surahs, like the surahs of the Quran. Here, the Quran expresses this challenge, فَلْيَأْتُوا بِحَدِيثٍ مِثْلِهِ. This is speech. And all of us as human beings, we speak and we write. But try to imagine if this kind of speech can come from a human being. And as Muslims, especially in this month of Ramadan, that is a very important message, to try to read the Quran more, contemplate the Quran more, and appreciate what a great gift it is, what a unique gift it is, that it is revelation which comes from heaven and not just normal speech. Sometimes the fact that we're able to read it and understand it, we take it for granted. Just like if many of us were alive in the time of the Prophet, we would see him walking and talking, we might not realize what the spiritual rank of the Prophet is. Just being able to see somebody, sometimes it distracts you from the deeper reality of that person's spiritual rank, even if they are a prophet, even if they're a ma'soom. The same thing is true of the Quran, because we see it every day, we can read it every day. Sometimes we take it for granted, and let us not take the Quran for granted in order to be able to derive the maximum benefit from it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.